I'm Claire Rose, and you are watching Influence Matters, sponsored and brought to you today by Rosedale Publishing. I invite you to join me each week as I talk about tips and tricks, tools, resources, secrets, hacks, whatever you want to call them, that helps the savvy influence creator just like you to strategically and intentionally cultivate their influence. As always, I'd like to invite you, if you have a question you'd like to have on the show, answered on the show, or if you have a tool or a cool trick or a cool hack that you'd like to share with us that we can share on the show, I'd like to invite you to send those to us. You can send them to hello@clararose.com. Be sure to include things like the name you'd like us to use on the show. That can be anything from anonymous, if you don't want anyone to know who you are, all the way up to your full name, your business, and how we can contact you if we're interested. So those things make our show richer and more exciting and interesting for all of you. So we invite you to do that. Today we're going to start with our question of the week. So our question of the week comes from Chelsea by the Sea. I don't think that's her whole real name, but Chelsea says, I've started writing my book. I think it's going well, but it doesn't even sound like me. Is that a bad thing? Well, unfortunately, I think that is a negative thing, only because when we write our book, it's really a tool, right? The reason that we're writing it is we want to use that tool for something. So you don't want to gain a reader who then maybe someday watches a video or even someday meets you and says, wow, that totally didn't even sound like that person. So I think it's important to try and capture your writing style or your voice or your own particular way that you sound in the written word. Now, finding your voice can sound mystical and all woo-woo-y, but it really isn't that difficult to do. It's really about figuring out what it is that you say that makes it sound like you. Now, here's a good exercise for you to try. Record yourself teaching something. And you could be actually doing it somewhere, maybe at a networking group or someplace where you're going to be teaching anyway or sharing anyway. Just record it and listen for those words that you uniquely say that sound like you. Recently, when I was hosting a show, somebody pointed out to me that I use the word lovely a lot. Well, and I didn't even realize how much I used the word lovely until it was pointed out to me. And I kind of laughed about it. And I thought, oh, that is one of the things that I say that makes me sound like me. So if I'm writing something and I don't include the words that sound like me, it's not going to capture my voice. It's not going to sound like Clara when you read it. So, of course, I think it's important to always be aware of those things. One other thing that you might try, aside from a training, is actually like when you're sharing a story with a friend, record that. It might feel awkward at first, but that's when you really get to hear how you speak and how you share stories. We're all connected in a way with stories. So I have a savvy tweet for you, of course, as always. You can find me on Twitter at Clara Rose Chat. To capture your writing voice, use your own personal prose and create a bank of power words to draw from. Now, power words sounds fancy, but it's not. Those are just the words that you have in your experiments, right, in your recordings, found that you use those words. Personal prose is just the way that you say things normally. That's all that is. But to capture your writing voice, you're going to need to know what those are. So have a listen to how you speak, how you teach, how you tell stories, and create a bank of words from those recordings. Those are things that we're going to pull from as we write to make it sound like you in your book. So I call that finding your voice. We're all unique, right? We're all different, and I want to encourage you to own your uniqueness. Own your own uniqueness. Own those pieces about you that's different. This can be a little scary for some people, but as I work with authors, I really encourage them to make a point of being who they are, stepping into and owning what makes you different from other people. This can be scary. Sometimes we're afraid to stand out or be different. Now, let me tell you why it's super important to stand out and be different. First of all, think of some people who have been really successful, like a Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, or J.K. Rowling. Those are just a few people, but you could probably come up with a whole list of people that are successful in what they do. Could it be that they're not the best at what they do, but perhaps they're just finding a way to stand out and be different and be noticed? Right? I'd like to just pose that to you. Perhaps they're the best at what they do, but perhaps they've just found a way to stand out and get noticed. So that is something that you're going to need to do as well as you capture your voice. You want to be uniquely who you are so you can stand out and you can be different so you will be remembered. I caution you, especially on social media, to remember that if you're not standing out, you're blending into a very large sea of people. So, if you're weird, own it. Find the people who are weird like you. Those are your people. Authenticity really does matter. So, the great Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." So, clearly people have been saying it for a long time, but authenticity really does matter. Be who you are. Own it. And if you do that in your writing, people will connect with you on a level that is as if they knew you. In fact, one of the most exciting things to me is when an author that we've just published their book says, "Oh my gosh, my mother or my grandmother or my best friend read the book and said it was like sitting across the table from me having a conversation." That's a huge win. We have truly captured their voice, and that's super exciting to me. That's how you're going to relationally connect with people as they read your work. Okay, I have another savvy tweet for you. Hop on over to Twitter at Clara Rose Chat is where I'm at, and tweet this out. Own your uniqueness. You will attract the right people. They will become your peeps. Let's talk about communication. Now, it doesn't sound like this should be important when we're talking about finding your voice, but it is. At least 75% of our communication is nonverbal. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm talking about things like facial expression, tone of voice, body language, all of the things that are the non-word pieces. So somebody has their hand on their hip and they're scowling at you. That conveys something that no words convey. No words are necessary to convey. Am I right? Of course. When you're having a conversation with somebody, if they're leaning in, they're paying attention and they're engaged. If they're sitting back, slunched down in their chair, looking at their phone, besides being terribly rude, they are not engaged with you. The words that you say don't have the same meaning because the nonverbal communication is not there. Now, so what does that mean for us as writers? If 75% of all communication is nonverbal, what does that mean to us? What that means to us is that your words alone must work harder, right? So that we have to say what we want to say in the written word without all of the nonverbal cues. Here's a pro tip for you. We don't write like we speak. So not only do our words have to work a little bit harder, well, a lot harder actually, but it's going to be different than the spoken word anyway. So it's a different kind of communication, but we want to be as engaging as if we were having a conversation with somebody. You say, Clara, I don't even know how to begin to do that. Well, it really is going to start with you capturing your voice, sounding like who you are, and then, of course, getting your message crafted for the world in such a way that makes sense to them. Now, this is a no-brainer that I guess I've talked about it before, and you may have heard me talk about it. Please don't be boring. We've all had those moments where we're at a conference or we're in a board meeting or a business meeting, or we're in church or listening to a sermon perhaps, and the speaker's not really all that engaging, right? It's happened to all of us. Sometimes they're boring things because the topic is boring, but I don't believe that a speaker needs to be boring. And we certainly don't want our writing to be boring. So we need to find ways to engage people so that they're not bored out of their mind when they're reading your book or reading your article, reading whatever your written word that you've put out there is. We want to make sure that we're not boring so that our message is getting across. I'm going to say that one of the best ways that you can not be boring is to learn to paint a picture. So painting a picture with your words is all about putting the person in the moment. Now, writers of scripts for like television, some of those things, they are masterful at using words to pull people in, but you don't have the visual piece. Remember, you only have that 25%. You just have the words, nothing more. So you have to paint a picture with your words. Another great tip for writing in a way that's not boring is to change up the rhythm of your sentences. Especially for a new writer, it can be easy to get into like a cadence, if you will. So you're saying da 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 and da, da 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 and da. Right? So we have the same rhythm as we're writing, and so our readers get into that same rhythm, and that can become really boring. It's kind of like listening to a song that has the same rhythm constantly. Right? Or they're using the same words over and over. Sometimes my husband will make fun of songs and I have to laugh at him where the song's over and they've said, you know, I'll be with you forever 50 times, and he laughs. He says, do you think that they'll be with her forever? And we laugh about it. They've just drilled and drilled and drilled. You're like, oh, come on already. It can happen in writing. It sounds like it can't happen, but it really can happen. So changing your rhythm means this. Da-da, da-da, da-da. Maybe a little longer sentence that has an and maybe your next sentence needs to be a little shorter. Not that it's choppy, but you can say it without using a conjunction, an and, to make it a longer sentence. So if you change up the rhythm, you're going to change the reading rhythm of your reader. It's going to make it more interesting for you and for them. Arouse curiosity. So you want to write in such a way that people want to know what's next, what's going to happen next, right? And that's good storytelling. It takes some practice, and you need to remember this is a craft that you're honing. Of course, evoke emotion whenever it calls for it. Of course, we don't want to evoke emotion just for the sake of emotion, right? It's not about making them cry on purpose, right? It's about if it calls for, the storyline calls for emotion, that you do it in such a way that it brings emotion to the surface for them. I think that makes it less boring. And then, of course, avoid jargon. Now, because I specialize in nonfiction business books, it can be easy for one of my authors to fall into the jargon usage trap. But in truth, if you're not in their industry, you may not know what some of those words mean. I experienced this myself when I was originally naming the publishing company that I own. And I called it Rosedale Word Crafters. So to me, that made perfect sense. I'm a word crafter. I craft words. My authors are word crafters. But people didn't connect with it. It's kind of a jargon within the industry. The same thing is true for matters, front matter and back matter of a book. People didn't know what that meant, but I used it regularly. Front matter is everything that falls before the core content. Back matter is everything that falls after the content. So front matter, back matter. Made perfect sense to me, but it was like I was speaking another language to my new author. So I had to work on that. So including jargon can be dangerous in that unless it's written specifically by someone in an industry, for that same industry, you're going to lose your reader by being too jargony. Of course, play with words. I love plays on words. Even this show, Influence Matters. It's a play on words. Influence matters, meaning it's a matter of influence, and then matters of influence. And influence matters because influence does matter. And the matter of influence is all the pieces. So fun play on words. Maybe not everybody got that when I named this show, but I love play on words, and there are other people out there who do as well. So just experiment with that a little. Don't get too crazy because sometimes you can lose people. And then, of course, remember to use sensory words. We are sensory people. So we feel, we touch, we see, we taste, we smell. Those are all sensory words that we can use to make our story more engaging, paint a better picture, and make our words less boring to our reader. And then, of course, be concise. I am the queen of crossing out extra so's and that's and words that we just don't need to say. Now, we say them when we speak, of course, but remember I said we don't speak the way we write, or we don't write the way we speak, whichever way you want to look at that. When you're writing, things need to be concise and clean and clear. If you have a sentence that runs on for an entire paragraph, that is not concise, clean, and clear. And you're going to lose people. Not just lose them in the boring way, but lose them in that it's difficult to follow that train of thought through 7 commas. Commas help, mind you, but it can really be difficult to know what you're saying. So just be clear on your topics when you're writing a sentence. Be clear on what you're trying to say. If you don't need to say it with 10 words, you could say it with 4. Say it with 4. Let's be concise. And then, of course, edit well. And you hear me harp on that a lot. Everyone needs an editor, because everyone needs an editor. I need an editor. I'm the chief editor at Rosedale, but I need an editor. We all need editors. Edit well, and then edit again. And then find somebody to help you with some more editing, because it's that important. Okay, again, I have a savvy tweet for you. I'd like you to hop on over to Twitter and say, let it cool. Set your content aside for a while, and when you come back to it, you'll have a better eye for errors. You can find me at Clara Rose Chat, of course. So what do I mean by letting it cool? Of course, it's an industry jargon that I'm using on you after I just told you not to do that in writing, but I'm going to use it on this show. It is industry jargon for set it aside, obviously. So when you write something, make time in your schedule, in your deadlines, to set it aside to let it cool. Set it aside so that when you come back to it, you will read what you wrote, not what you think that you wrote. So it's super easy to fall into that trap of what I'm thinking in my brain is what actually came out of my fingers onto the paper, right? So if you've let it cool for 24 hours, 48 hours, the bigger the piece of work, the longer I recommend letting it cool. Come back to it. You're going to find those errors that you didn't see before. It's an interesting thing to me when I work with new authors on a book, or even repeat authors on a book. When we are all the way done, we have literally been through every one of their chapters multiple times, right? We went through it in the beginning when they wrote the chapter, and then I went and I developmentally edited it so it was clean, clear, grammatically correct, a little more concise and crisp, if you will, and then sent it back to them for them to pile on or say, yeah, I love those. And then at the end, when we've compiled all of those chapters, pulled them together, we've been through all the chapters again, and still at that point, we're finding things that we think we said, but we didn't really say. And then this is even more important when you get that first copy, that proof copy of your book back in, you're going to even find more that you didn't see in the digital world that you can catch in the physical world as you peruse through that copy. That's why we get one of those copies, right? We get a proof copy so we can go through and go, oh, look what we missed. Editing is such an important piece when you put out something of quality. If you don't care, if it's just a tool for you that I'm probably not going to sell them, I'm going to use them as a from the stage, I have a book kind of thing, or you're going to use the title, maybe it's not as important, but when somebody reads that and goes, oh my gosh, this person, look at how terrible this is, it does impact them. Some of us, of course, have a more critical eye because this is what we do for a living, but almost any intelligent, educated human being is going to catch some errors. So that's my little speech there on making sure you have an editor. Edit and edit again. Then, of course, I want to point out that every one of you has a story. And the art is in crafting your message for the world. So you have to ask yourself, okay, I know I need to hone my voice. I know I need to find my voice. Now I need to tell my story and craft my message. What do I mean by everyone has a story? Well, everyone has a story. What do you do? Are you a coach? Are you a banker? Are you what is it that you do in the world to make a living? So you have a story about that. Why do you do that? Did you fall into it? Did you, were you like me? I wrote my first book. We're going to just use little air quotes on that one when I was 11. It was notebook paper, lined notebook paper, yarn, stringing it together to make it into a book. And I wrote a story. I was 11. I couldn't figure out how to spell Bermuda. This was, back before Google. So it was Clara and the Devil's Triangle because I couldn't come up with the right spelling, and that bothered me. So that's the beginning of my story about what I do now, is that I've been writing since I was 11. I've always known I was going to be a writer. I've always known that I had a love for writing and I wanted to be a writer. So much so that at 11, I thought, I'm going to write a book. And so I did. That's what I'm talking about. We all have a story. Now, you may not have that same story, but that doesn't mean that you don't have your own story to tell, because we all do. So you think about, what is it that you do in this world, and what message do you have that you can share with those around you? Remember, in the beginning today, we talked about it being a tool that you use to do something with. Right? I think that's an important point to keep in mind. This tool that I create, which is not going to happen overnight, by the way, it's a process. This takes time. If you're working on an article, then that's a little bit different. It's much more quickly done. You still, of course, want to capture your own voice, right? So it sounds like you. Super important if you're blogging regularly or you're putting articles in magazines, things of that nature. But in a book, it's a labor of love. I don't know who to quote on saying this, but I've read it multiple times, quoted by different people, I think, saying writing's easy. You just sit down at your keyboard and you slit open your vein. Because it really is a labor of love. It takes time, it takes dedication. I encourage you to find someone to help you through this process. If you try it alone, some people are successful alone, but it's a labor of love, and you're going to work on it for 6 months, 9 months, however long it takes to get through that process. I've had some authors actually come to me, they've been working on their book for 10 years before we start working together. And there's a whole other reason for that, which we are going to talk about next week when you come back and tune in. We'll talk about the 3 easy steps to writing your book. But today, let's just stay focused on getting your message captured in such a way that your story is being told to the world in a way that makes sense, that it's the tool that you're going to use to do something with. For me, my books are all about helping people to connect with what matters. For instance, passion matters. My book, Everything Matters. Authenticity matters. These are all topics that I think matter. And so I want to share with the world, with my readers, that I think these things matter because they do. And they should think the same thing. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But anyway, I want to just take a couple of quick minutes to first thank our Chelsea by the Sea for sending in a question. Don't forget, if you want to be on the show in that way, I'm happy to share your question with the world. If you would like to share a cool tool, please do so. I encourage you to send it to hello@clararose.com. Be sure, if it's a tool that I need to look into, that you give me where I can find it. If it's an app or if it's something so I have a little bit of time to research it and make sure that I'm sharing it in such a way that's beneficial to you and to all of the other savvy influence creators. So why influence matters? Why this show? Because each one of us as an influencer, as a potential influencer, a newbie influencer, or even a full-fledged, wow, you're impressive influencer, we all need to continually be working towards strategically and intentionally cultivating our influence. It doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen overnight. but it's a labor of love, kind of like your book. So I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you as you send in your tips, tricks, tools, resources, hacks, secrets, whatever they are, so that we can put them on the show and make a difference for all of us. And then, of course, answer any questions that might be on your mind that you're not sure what to do with. So as we wrap up today, let's just do a quick recap on the things that we talked about. First, we talked about honing your voice, finding your voice, building that power bank of words, right? Make sure you do that before you start any writing, whether you're going to start a book or even an article. Pull those words together because we want your reader to say, oh, I know this person. I want you to write in such a way that they connect with you on a personal level. It sounds like a silly exercise, but I promise you it makes a huge difference in the finished work that you put out there. Of course, don't be boring. We touched on how to not be boring. So if you would like that list, you can shoot me an email, hello@clairerose.com. I'm happy to share that list with you. And if you have any other questions that you don't feel like you want shared on the air, you can certainly drop me an email, and I'm happy to respond in that way as well. Of course, if you're looking to write your book, I'm happy to help you through that process. We are almost out of time today, but thank you so much for your time and attention and for joining us today, and we will see you next week when we talk about the 3 easy steps to writing your book. See you then. If you're ready to take your influence to the next level, I invite you to download our free app, The Savvy Author. There you're going to find everything that you need to know about becoming a savvy author. Whether you're a first-time author or you're an author again, we would love to be a part of your journey.